And so it as I was starting to do this research with DMT, at the time, I started this 10 years ago or so. At the time, there wasn't much research on it. The previous research was done, by Strassmann with DMT, and there was another group doing research in Germany, but they were kind of modeling psychosis with it. They were taking a completely different angle. So there wasn't much of a thread to go into. But when I started to go into, I discovered that there was a lot of people using DMT, and that some of those users over time, as they were using, some of them, not all, but some of them, coming into these conclusions of, oh, I've realized after taking so much DMT that what's really going on is that there are these people, pulling the threads, or reality is a simulation. I've uncovered it. There's all this machinery behind it, and so forth and so on. And a lot of people also coming from ayahuasca experiences, coming with great hope and with great, a complete transformation of the ways in which that they view reality as, for example, reality is governed by a unifying principle of love, right? Or consciousness is everywhere, and this is somehow a manifestation of how everything is ultimately good in the universe. And so I was fascinated by this idea that somehow people became interested in reality after these experiences, on the one hand, and that there was this phenomenon which some referred to as this ontological shock, that they're faced with a new reality that people were not ready to face somehow, or that it seemed completely novel and extraordinary. And so I decided to test that, to put some numbers. And so I did a survey for people who were going into ceremonies, using ayahuasca, many of them. I also had a psilocybin group, so psilocybin mushroom ceremony group. And what we found was that on average, there was a shift away from materialism or physicalism. And this worldview, this metaphysical position, states that, in essence, mind emerges from matter. What we call phenomenal experience or consciousness is an emergent property of some neurochemical process undergoing in the brain, in the organism, and that the fundamental aspect of reality is physics, or material stuff. And so after a single psychedelic experience, people significantly shifted away from materialism. They rejected the notion of materialism. And the other effect that I found was that people embraced panpsychism. Panpsychism is the notion that everything in the universe is conscious. This book is conscious. This mug is conscious. There's debates around the amount of consciousness or self-awareness, or awareness, if you could speak about that, of different objects that we usually consider inanimate versus a biological organism or a human being. But broadly speaking, consciousness is everywhere. And so essentially that's in essence what the claims refers to, that these experiences can shift the way that people view what is the nature of consciousness and reality, and that they can be ontologically shocking to some people. They have sort of like this this capacity to transform these worldviews. So in this point, I think it's what I just mentioned was how these molecules impact at an individual level the way that people can understand consciousness, right, or reality, right? To the scientist, I think the greatest value of something like DMT and 5-MeO is that it allows us to understand how consciousness is constructed, how subjective experience is a constructive dynamic process that is constantly in this process of construction and deconstruction of different facets. And a good example of this is the experience of ego dissolution or self-dissolution, or the idea of the sense of self. And so the sense of self is a core feature of conscious experience that we see, for example, with 5-MeO, you can dramatically take away from conscious experience. It's kind of debated to what extent you can fully subtract it. In our early phenomenological studies, we see that you can remove at least important aspects of the sense of self almost entirely. And therefore, you can reach to some foundation of consciousness, right? In experience and in brain activity. So you can tap into, if you want to put it in very ambitious terms, the bedrock of human consciousness.
The basal layer.
The basal layer, right? And that is different from the project of the neural correlates of consciousness, where you're precisely you were alluding a bit with anesthesia,
right?
When you're shutting down experience and bringing it back up. And so that is the contrast that they're using to understand, well, what is coming online when the lights turn on, right? That's the project of the neural correlates of consciousness.
Right, well said.
This is more like the naked experience project of consciousness, if you will. My position as from the point of view of neuroscience and the kind of studies that I do, when I do the work that I do, I find that the questions that you can put into experiments, you can operationalize, are more in line with an emergent property of consciousness.
Yes.
That conscious experience requires the brain to function in a specific way to give rise to an experience that is reportable by individuals, right? And so, as a neuroscientist, I have to take a physicalist or a materialist position that allows me to understand the emergent properties of consciousness and how they relate to the brain. At a bit more metaphysical, ontological level, I tend to align with this notion that it's a bit more of a dialectical thing, the inner and the outer, that conscious experience is intertwined with the physical world, but the physical world is only disclosed via conscious experience. And so the conscious experience is a project of the world, and the world is a project of the individual mind as well.
Chicken and the egg, a little bit, yeah.
There is something at that at the deeper philosophical reflection that seems to be somewhat unescapable. But when you're doing these kind of experiments, there are regularities that you see in the world out there, that if you perturb that brain area, if you affect this or that, things will change in experience in a dramatic way. And therefore, there's a very close relationship between the brain and conscious experience. And I don't think that the kind of work that I'm doing in any way could address other sort of questions of whether or not consciousness is fundamental or not fundamental.